Hey, welcome to episode 100 of the Hangar Z Podcast, brought to you by Vertical Valor Magazine. Man, it feels really good to announce episode 100, and it's hard to believe we've released 100 episodes to date. One thing that's been constant for the Hangar Z Podcast, as we've grown over the last 3 years, and 100 episodes is change. We've constantly worked to bring new and different types of interviews to our aviation community. Our hope in doing so is that our guest stories will challenge you, motivate you, and work to strengthen our global public safety aviation community. The guests we have in store for our 100th episode will definitely challenge and motivate you. This is part one of a two-part series. During the Hangar Z Leadership Summit 2023, Jack Schonely introduced me to the book titled Touching the Dragon by Jimmy Hatch. After the Leadership Summit, I bought the book and I couldn't put it down. Jimmy's story is truly inspiring. Jimmy's a former Navy SEAL, master naval parachutist. He was involved in over 150 missions between Afghanistan, Iraq, Bosnia and Africa. Jimmy was also an expert canine trainer and a handler as a Navy SEAL. Jimmy writes about the battles he fought overseas, as well as the battles he fought on the home front after being critically wounded while attempting to rescue Army deserter Private Bowe Bergdahl. In Jimmy Hatch's book, Touching the Dragon, as well as in our conversation, Hatch courageously discusses the ever-important topic of PTSD by opening up about his own battle as he worked to heal from the career-ending gunshot wound that exploded through his femur, requiring 18 surgeries and 12 months of recovery, in which he had to relearn how to walk. Jimmy talks about the nonprofit canine organization he developed to protect our nation's working dogs called Spike's Canine Fund. As a canine handler on several deployments, James' life was regularly spared by the work of canines. One of the most memorable was Spike. And on James' final deployment, the night he was critically wounded, a canine Remco spared James' life while losing his own. From that evening on, James oriented his life around the training, care, and preservation of working dogs. In addition to working as the founder and president of the fund, he works with local law enforcement to fine-tune their work. If you're like me and listen to podcasts in the car, oftentimes with kids present, this may be one of the episodes you excuse them from. Thank you for joining us for the last 100 episodes. We look forward to continuing to bring inspiring stories and conversations like the one you'll hear here with Jack Schonely and Jimmy Hatch. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Metro Aviation, Shotover, and CNC Technology. So you talked about the brain injury. I think in the book you referred, it was a TBI that you had as a result of that. Can you talk about how that impacted the rest of your career and led to talk about some aggressive behavior as a result?
Yeah, man. So it makes you impulsive, angry and impulsive, and you aren't aware of it. And if you're a guy with a big ego like me, you need a guy with a big ego that you respect to tell you that, because you're not going to believe just any old buddy. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You know, one of the guys on my board of my nonprofit, he recently had a pretty bad car accident and a head injury. And he came to visit me and I was like, holy shit, man. And so I took him aside after and I was like, listen, man, here's the deal. And I love you. You're my friend, but like, you're loud and you're rude. You talk over the top of people. He's not like that normally. You know what I mean? He was just more aggressive, more belligerent, really. And it wasn't because he was angry. It's just that's what happens with head injuries a lot, especially to men. And I tell you, even sometimes what you might consider a small one, a blast stuff, you're near a blast. You know, a breach going off and that thump in your head and it makes you a little dizzy. Well, that's caused some damage, you know. So those little things, they take a toll over time. And I think we just need to get smarter about, I think you see it a little bit with the NFL. I mean, it's mostly eye candy, right? But until you see guys getting tested with really good equipment, guys like, you know, doing breaches and the people that are really hanging it out and getting those big concussions, you know, we need to see real good research going into that. And it's going to be expensive. There's just so much about the brain that we don't know. The key is to be there for each other when those things happen so that you can get your people to the resources. And I use this is a bad metaphor, but this is what I talk about with my friends anybody that wants to listen to me run my mouth about mental health. And I use myself as an example. Head injury, mental health, right? It's not, my feelings are hurt. That's mental health too. But I had a fucking head injury, and it affects the way I see the world and the way I react to things. It's a big deal, right? But I also have an ego, and I'm over here in this little island, and over here is the island with the resources. Everybody says, we need more resources. Okay. Well, almost everybody you know in law enforcement has grown up in an environment where there were resources available, right? They've been there. But people aren't going to them because they don't know what will happen. They don't trust them, and they don't want the people around them that they work with to think that they're fucked up. And so I needed, here's my little island, Here's the island of the resources. I needed guys I loved and trusted, guys who had covered open ground in a gunfight to save me the night that I got shot up. They grabbed me by the hand and they walked me across the little bridge and said, hey, here's the resources. They weren't social workers. They weren't psychiatrists. They were just dudes who loved me and didn't know what the fuck to say. But they're like, we need to get him somewhere so he can get help. It's not that big of a deal. It's just the hand holding with people who you respect and love and say, come on, let's go.
Yeah.
That's the big difference. That's the part of it that will make the difference, I believe, in both of our work environments. And it is a matter of transparency by the leadership. Hey, people struggle. So-and-so struggled. We helped him out. He's back. We're good. Easy day. That'll be a big deal. And then looking out for each other.
Yeah. And
genuinely doing it. Some guys will say, hey, you're having problems because they want their position or, whatever sick human thing we can come up with. But being legit, like brothers, and saying, hey, man, are you okay? Instead of guy coming in at 7:30 in the morning to go do their shift, and you can smell the fucking booze on them. They're breathing zoo, which means they're drinking themselves to sleep, right? That's the time to say something. Right. And is it uncomfortable? Yeah, of course it is. But it's a little more comfortable than the guy driving home and, DUI, smashing, killing somebody or killing himself, God forbid,
What's the approach, Jimmy? I mean, what I mean is, like, when somebody loses somebody close to them, I've learned over the years that I had people thank me later for something I said. And the way I said it was, I don't know how you're feeling, but if there's anything I can do to help you, you let me know. And I'm thinking about you, but I don't know how you're feeling. People that say, oh, I know exactly how you're feeling. Bullshit. You don't. So is there a verbiage or an approach that you think your peers used that worked on you that you could share with us, that we know how to approach somebody, or something that we shouldn't do when we approach somebody if we're trying to help them?
Let me say this first. I think if you are in the business of seeing someone who's having an issue and how best to get them where they need to be, I would choose people they respect. If you're in that type of an environment. So these guys, my wife couldn't talk to me anymore, right? Most of the people in my world couldn't talk to me anymore because if you hadn't picked up a gun and gone to combat, I didn't really give a fuck what you thought, right? So
it has to be the type of person, not just what they say, but it has to be somebody that you look at in a certain way, respect.
So a medical professional said something to me once that makes a lot of sense. She said, look, the reason that PTSD is difficult to address and to deal with and treat, it's the same thing with cancer. Cancer is so individualized in everybody that while there are some ingredients that will help cancer, it may not help with this person, and this may need to be. At any rate, basically what she was saying is, listen, the mental health stuff is so individualized and so sensitive. It's so open to sensitivities that the best way to deal with it is by the people in that person's life that they trust and respect. And sometimes that's hard to find. But like in our environment, in the SEAL teams, like the guys on my team, I knew their wives. I knew, I think the best way to do it is just being honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even a guy I don't really care for comes up to me and says, look, man, I know we're not tight, but I really am worried about you. Right. Yeah. Like that kind of thing makes a difference.
I can understand that. Yeah.
I think just people being legit and like, hey man, I don't know how, but maybe we can go talk to somebody or, what's going on, man? You seem a little bit pissed off lately. Is everything cool? Just little check-ins, man.
Yeah.
And, I guess for me, the thing, Jack, was that it was consistent.
Yeah.
Right. It didn't just happen once. It was like, hey.
Yeah, everybody saw it.
Yeah, I'm like, fuck you guys, but they kept coming. Yeah. And look, here's the thing too, man. Depression is super selfish. There's a lot of people that have said a lot of things about it. But when you're depressed, all you can think about, oh, I fucked that up. Oh, I did that. It's all me, right? And so getting out of that is also a very, being as a person who might be able to go into a situation where one of our friends is messed up, we can get in there and start, talking and manipulating things in a way that somebody who doesn't know them would never get. I just think it's super valuable to have people that they're close to, that they trust. Sometimes the people that they're close to are the ones that are really exacerbating the problems.
Yeah.
and oftentimes that's husband and wife stuff, and that can get really. In fact, a lot of the suicides that we have, it's after the PTSD, war stuff, substance abuse, and then spouse stuff, and that's where it goes bad.
It seems like the common thread that I'm seeing in a lot of these conversations surrounds putting yourself in a position where you've got, and our friend and previous guest on the podcast, his name is RJ Garwood. He was a pilot, flew for Huntington Beach Police Department. His helicopter crashed last year, and in the course of our conversations with him, he talked about the importance of surrounding yourself with, he called them the five mother effers. You've got to have 5 mother effers in your life that you can call at the drop of a hat, and you know they're going to be there for you. And the same token, you've got to be one of those 5 for someone else. So you can't just be taking from your community. You've got to be giving as well. So if you look at yourself and you're like, well, I'm not helping anybody. I'm not one of those 5. Make an effort to be one of those 5 for somebody, because I think what you're saying is the honest truth. The people that are close to you and that you trust are the ones that are going to have the most impact, and be able to pick up on the cues that there's something not right.
Right.
So I think that's huge. Surrounding yourself with those people. And that's the most important part of it.
And I think there's also something that it's tied into something we were talking about earlier when we were joking about how, this is the most protected generation. We are so lucky. People aren't used to talking about tough things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we want nice, we want comfortable, we don't want to talk about, I want to take my knife out and cut my fucking, people's throat and, real stuff that real people go through, I think it's unpleasantness that we want to avoid,
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be the death of a lot of people.
Yeah.
I agree.
Well, going back to your career, you've kind of talked about going through buds, and the timeline's probably not accurate, but you jumped for a while, and then after your TBI, you left kind of that position, and then you end up as a cannon operator. Can you talk about becoming an operator and ultimately I'd like to get to kind of debrief the incident you already brought up a little bit with Spike, but maybe just to start, get into how you even got into a position where you were operating as a cannon handler.
So I was a huge dog lover as a kid, and I rescued dogs, and I read Old Yeller, read Ferngrove's Call of the Wild. Like that was
Those
my
are the saddest books, by the way.
What's that?
Those are the saddest books, by the way.
Yeah. They are. That gets you used to going and losing dogs in a gunfight.
Oh yeah.
I wrote a paper in the 90s before any of the war stuff had started, and some of the legacy missions we had. We had to go on very, very, very big cruise ships, and help people or find people, right? And having been on those, I've been on at least a dozen different times. I wrote this paper. Hey, man, we need to get some dogs, because dogs can cover open ground really fast, and they're a lot harder to hit, and they can smell bombs. And I didn't know anything about any of that shit. I called a dog breeder up somewhere in upstate New York. I'm like, hey, is this viable? And the guy's like, fuck yeah, it's easy. And he's like, cops are doing it all over. I'm like, okay. I wrote this paper saying, hey, we should get dogs and we should use them because it'll save lives. And they looked at me and they're like, hey, great job. See ya. They put it in the filing cabinet. And then, I went away and I came back. And when I came back, they were like, hey, man, we have guys that are dog handlers, but none of them are shooters. Would you volunteer to be a shooter and a dog handler? I was like, yeah. And that makes a big difference because I understood the tactics and I understood the personalities and and it gave me the opportunity to put the dog in places that maybe otherwise would not have occurred had it just been a guy who was not a SEAL, but, a good shooter that was brought on board specifically to handle dogs. But having a shooter in there, I think it helped. I really thought the dogs were invincible. When Spike died, it really shocked me. I also had not really given any thought to losing, even though I knew what kind of stuff we were in, I just never really felt like, I always felt like we're going to be okay. It was horrible. And then, the next dog I had, Toby, he went with another handler and got blown up by a suicide bomber. And then Falco was a really good dog, super friendly dog. They wanted to send him home because our first mission, he didn't do a really good job because he didn't really understand what the hell was going on. He went into a bark and hold on a guy in a field, which is, dangerous. Fortunately, the guy didn't. We got to him before the guy could shoot him. But, all these dogs died, and, we have friends that are around because of the dogs. And so it's sad, but it's also at the same time, I see that guy go home to his kids every night. You know what I mean? And,
Right.
I don't know, man, I'm kind of getting lost off in emotions here. It's a difficult, I'm glad I was a handler, but fuck, it's hard, man.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think, when I look back on my life and my relationship with animals and dogs in particular, it's one of those, again, going back to those bonds, like the dogs offer the companionship that no other thing can offer. And you wrote in your book, and I wrote this down as a quote because I thought it was really impactful. And by the way, let me back up. The section in your book where you write about Spike and what happened there, both times I read your book and I came across the subject of Spike and that incident. I happened to be on an airplane, and I'm reading it, and I'm crying reading this, and I'm in the middle of a ton of people I don't know, and I feel like everyone's staring at me, and I've got nowhere to hide. So I'm like, wow, I've got to stop reading this part of the book on an airplane,
Save that for the beach.
Yeah. But it goes in your book, you write, dogs don't lie about their love, and dogs don't project fraudulent versions of themselves. And it really was impactful for me because I feel like that's why I love animals and dogs so much, and why most people do as well. They're the purest version of love that you can possibly find. And I think it's hard as an operator to separate those feelings with an understanding that it's a tool for the job. And it's almost, I would imagine, impossible to do that. I just don't know how you separate the two. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, there's really no good answer in my book. I think in order for you to be good at doing that kind of work with the dog, you got to love the dog.
Yeah.
But that comes with a pain that I can just say my feelings. And I still feel this way, and I know it's not accurate. I know that there's, 100 different ways to think about this, but those dogs did not understand bullets. They did not understand what we were taking them to do. And if they did, they'd leave.
That's right.
And so we brainwash these dogs and we use them. We better damn take care of them in every possible way we can. So that's the only way I can find redemption for those dogs dying. And look, I did try very hard and failed to save all those dogs. Like, I didn't think I could shoot through somebody and kill Spike. I didn't think, Falco would get gunned down in a field, after saving 7 dudes' lives. And we create these little stories about them, but the truth is we're brainwashing them, and we better damn take care of them.
Absolutely.
So for me, that's what this Spike stuff is about, right? Like, we're trying to figure out the best ways to do it. Turns out, the schools are really helpful. It makes sense that if you teach the person that has the most influence over the life of the dog the best ways to do things with the dog, then the dog's going to have a better life. It's a bittersweet thing, the dog thing, right? Like, I've seen them do amazing things and save a lot, including mine, save a lot of lives. But is it the right thing to do ethically? This isn't a conversation for PETA. I'm just talking about as a man, like, do we, in order to make this right, we need to do everything we can to make sure the dogs are protected and trained to succeed. That's it. That's all we can do.
And you're certainly doing that. I mean, Spike's certainly doing that. Medical bills, really ballistic vests, training. One of the things, when I got to meet Emily and Jen recently up here in Bend, they're both amazing, just like you say they are. They are amazing. And we got to talking about the medical training that you guys are involved in. I was fascinated by that. I mean, I didn't have any medical training in my 5 years in canine. None. The only thing that you would get is if you asked a vet, hey, if this happened, what would I do? Oh, you do this. But there was no official training day or robotic dogs that bleed and you can do CPR on like there are now. And Jen and Emily explained what you guys are doing with that. And that's going to save dogs' lives for sure. I mean, just from choking on a ball. I mean, what do you do? I never do that. Of course,
It's already after, like, generally a few days after a course, we'll start getting emails about, hey, I found a dog that got stabbed and we patched him,
and he's alive.
Wild.
Yeah, that's great. You should feel very good about that.
It feels good. It feels good. And look, I know, like I said earlier, you can't run a nonprofit and be a socialist.
No.
There's some really good people that support us, and you'd be surprised sometimes by the people who support a nonprofit that takes care of cops and dogs.
Sure.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised who signs up for that.
Yeah. I know some of them that are signed up with you. And I will admit, I was surprised. But then the more I learned about it, the more I wasn't surprised, and said, wow, this person, and you know who I'm talking about, we can talk about it if you want, really supports you. Therefore, I look at them differently. I really like that they recognize the value of spikes.
Yeah, I think, Anderson, we're talking about Anderson Cooper.
We are.
Anderson told me flat out, he's like, look, I've always been a big fan of cops. And he goes, and I love dogs, and I believe in what you're doing. And so I don't think a lot of people know that. And when we go to, I consider him a friend. And, is he liberal? I don't know, because I've never really talked about politics with him. I did ask him one time about, when he moderates the debates, and he was like, look, man, by the time the candidates get to that debate, they're robots. Like, I'm not going to ask him anything they haven't already been asked, which I thought was really interesting. He's a really good guy, very down to earth, shockingly shy. Yeah. But genuinely, like, he has done a lot for Spike's Cannons.
Yeah. It was
awesome.
He donated his what it was like a game show that he went on.
Well, he's done 3 of them.
And he donated the money that he won on that.
Yeah. He actually, Jeopardy, he didn't win. So he got $10,000 and he apologized. He's like, I'm sorry, dude, I'll write you a check for the other 40.
Oh, jeez.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
And then he went on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
That's the one.
$500,000.
Yeah.
And he went on, I think, no, that was Jet Tila who went on Wheel of Fortune for us. Yeah. And he won quite a bit of money too.
Yeah.
In the book, you kind of outline spikes, and I think maybe the original intent was to help departments whose budgets don't support getting them ballistic vests and those types of things. Has spikes evolved beyond that? Like, who's the ultimate customer that's looking for help from spikes?
I think anybody that's involved in a work on behalf of a community or our country that has a dog that is going to be asked to put itself in danger to protect humans, that's our customer.
Okay.
And we want to help. And we want to make sure that, one of the things I've seen both in law enforcement, military, actually even in search and rescue too, a lot of people say they can do things that they can't. Yeah. They want you to believe that they can do things that they can't. And that is a fucking problem
it is.
In the type of work where lives are on the line. And it is something that I've tried to say in kind ways to some of my law enforcement friends and the SAR people. Some people don't like to hear it. I don't care. I'm going to keep saying it. And I have pretty good examples of occasions where dogs were used poorly and that we ended up losing a resource because of the people who were handling the dogs. And I want everybody to understand that's involved in the canine world that when you show up on a scene, you don't know how many people are there watching, and you don't know what decisions are going to be made based on the things that you do or don't do, in your time on that mission. And if you come acting like you've got it all under control and you blow it out your ass, well, that's basically the impression that the leaders of that crew are going to have of all people with dogs. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, and it's a very big deal.
It's been an issue in the canine world for decades, in law enforcement, certainly. Yeah. And I didn't like it at all. I saw it, not a lot of it, but I saw it, when I was a canine handler, and I hated it. And then I thought, well, it must be limited to canine. And then I go to aviation and I find out, it's in aviation too. There were people saying, that's not a problem. We could do that. Wow. And we go, hold on. Whoa.
Yeah.
You can't do that for the following 25 reasons, They go, oh no, we can do it. It's the same. It's an ego problem. It's not just the dog world. It transcends.
Yeah. But man, I just think, look, we all have to agree that in the line of work that we're talking about here, military, law enforcement, aviation, when you make a mistake, people die.
Yeah, they do.
It's not like I'm a baker, and there's nothing wrong with being a baker, right? Like, if I leave the stuff in the oven too long, it's burnt, and, I'm going to get in trouble. But like, nobody's dead. Nope. If you leave a dog in the car and it's too hot, the dog dies. You know what I mean? Like, anyway,
definitely high stakes games, regardless of whether it, like you said, in canine and aviation or as an operator, we deal with a lot of stuff. And I guess going back to the original part of the conversation surrounding PTSD, you know, you look back at your career and you've got a TBI that you sustained while you're jumping. And then now you've got these incidents that you were involved with your dogs. Like these things are both emotional and weigh on you. And in the same way in law enforcement, you know, we look back at your career, there's these things that these traumatic incidents that you go through. And we talk about the analogy of a bucket. You know, if as a bucket fills up, you've got to have a way to empty that. And if you don't, at some point the bucket's going to overflow, which I guess kind of leads me to the next part of your story. Can you talk about the gunfight where you were shot and the medevac that came afterwards, and then the hospital stay that came after that?
Yeah. So we had postponed a mission that we were going to do that night because the environmentals were just not in our favor. Like we like dark, windy, loud, rainy nights, right? And about, I don't know, like 30 minutes after we canceled it, the boss said, "Hey man, come check this out." And we had some intel on different crew, and Bergdahl was mentioned. There was a connection intel wise, right? So I'm like, yeah, here, let's go. Right. In my mind, we were on a Bergdahl mission. Turns out when I went to the court martial, there were people who didn't think that was the case. But in my mind, and in the mind of the guys that I was on the mission with, that's what we were doing. But
can you refresh real quick everyone's memory on that, who Bergdahl was and what was happening?
Yeah. So it was Bowe Bergdahl, who was a young Army private who'd had a really difficult childhood himself and probably ought not to have been in the military. He decided that he was going to walk away from his unit and head to another base where apparently there was a general and he could go tell the general, you know, that things were fucked up. So he left, and he was captured within minutes, I think, you know, and he was tortured, and they held him for 5 years. They traded him for some Taliban dudes later. But we left, we flew out, getting ready to land, and I could see the tracers. We were getting shot at pretty bad, and got off the helo, had to hold up actually while the guys on the helo to our left had a big contact. They had to take care of it. And then we started splitting. The hostage rescue missions are definitely they're the toughest because you have to get close. You have to see who's who in the zoo before you start pulling trigger. And to do that, sometimes you need to expose yourself. So I had to split up my team. So I took myself, Mike Toussaint, who was a military police guy, master at arms, Navy, who was a dog handler. He's a stud from Texas. I call him the Texan in my book. I had him and another shooter. And we took off, got into a little bit of a skirmish, saw some kids. Didn't know they were kids first. Used the dog to find out they were kids. Put them out in this field, called up to the overhead assets, and placed IR chem lights around them. And I said, "Hey, these are kids here." And right about that time, I saw them signaling me. And I could see a couple of dudes moving about 400 meters away, and they were heavy. They were loaded with something. So I moved. It's funny. I can't remember my fucking PIN number to my bank account. But I remember the winds that night were out of the east, right? And we landed going south to north. And so I knew the guys were off to my east, and I knew that's where the wind was coming from. So I lined us up for the dog. We were a good 300-400 meters away. So I knelt down to see if they'd still keep moving, and they didn't. They just ducked down. I couldn't see them. So I was like, "Hey, let's go get them." And so we got up, and I'd done this a couple of times in the past where I put the dog out ahead of us a little bit. And the dog, obviously, they have a better sense of smell and hearing. They'll tell you that when you're getting close to the bad guys if they're still there, right? So we started walking, and I was staying up with the dog, watching the dog, because the dog's going to give you, he's going to tell you where they are. And sure enough, man, we started getting closer. His ears come up, and he starts getting big. And I see him rise up on the side of a ditch, and I'm watching him. And then all of a sudden, boom, boom, 2 rounds go off, and I could see the muzzle flash. From the muzzle flash, I could see the guy shooting Remco, and he was definitely not an American. So I started filling him in, and I screamed at Mike, "Hey, get the dog back." And then his buddy, the guy I'm shooting, that guy's buddy panics and just sprays with an AK and hits me in the leg, my right leg, right above my knee, and it blew my femur out the back of my leg, and I was done, man. I was a hazard. I was more useless than anything. Because I was screaming, all the bad guys had to do was just point in the direction of the guy screaming. But still, man, buddies saved my life. Those TF guys came in and got me. And man, I got to tell you, it's just exactly what I said to those families in Tacoma. Imagine the worst night of your life. You're bleeding to death, and you're cold because you're losing your blood, and it's really scary. And without a doubt, that those guys are going to come get you. I don't know if there's a more powerful, like, think about that reputation that a lot of people earned. I mean, that's a hard thing to translate to people, what that is like. I mean, laying in a puddle of your own fucking blood and there's sand, I could blood and I'm like, yeah, those guys will be in here. I remember telling the other shooter, I'm like, hey man, get a grid and call those guys in, because I'm going to bleed to death. That's what I said. Holy shit. And sure enough, man, those motherfuckers came in, and they came in close. And I went over and, I was pogo sticking on my left leg and threw me on there, and they threw the dog at my feet. And I asked the medic to get on with me. They flew us to Sharana, and I watched him try to work on the dog, and he was dead. I couldn't get past that. And I really, I couldn't see. And the dog was out in front of us. And, for a long, long time, I really was hard on myself for that dog getting killed. And at the end of the day, man, you're in a gunfight. Everybody with a gun gets a vote. And so I keep trying to put bulletproof vests on dogs. I try to concentrate on. But look, man, sometimes those things get oil and water and they get messed up, and I can't function in my role in this nonprofit. It actually is like, I really struggle. Like, who the fuck are you to be helping these dogs out? You're the one that got them killed. You hypocrite, all the things that you can tell yourself. I don't know if that's a head injury thing or it's just being a guy thing. I don't know. But regardless, I'm not going to stop. I'm just going to keep going. And it's important.
Well, I think for you, that helping the dogs is a way to help you empty your buckets. It's an outlet for you. And, as much as you love animals and you benefited from their service, I think you want to see other people benefit in that same way, and that's huge.
Yeah. I got buddies that are cops, and they go out and have scary nights, like the guy here in Ohio, and he's got 2 little girls. And I know that guy's going to go home more likely than not because of that dog. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's a powerful thing, But having said that, like you said, John, we need to make sure we're taking care of that dog,
Yeah.
And we do.
Yeah. Going back to the flight, there's a picture you took or had taken and put in the book, which I thought was funny.
How arrogant is that, right?
Yeah, that's what I thought was funny. How you write that?
Lollipop hit me. Yeah. What kind of an ego? Speaking of ego, holy. Right?
But it was an interesting part of. First of all, I didn't even know those things existed. That's how ignorant I am.
I didn't either.
Of what you guys are doing over there. But the fact that you got that, your homie gave it up for you, like that speaks volumes about who he was and what he was willing to do to make sure you're okay. So you get flown to the hospital. Can you talk about the beginning of the hospital stay and what that was like? And you talk about kind of the depression that sets in while you're there. Can you kind of elaborate on what that looked like?
So the hospital thing, I think it's interesting. We're all relatively physical people, and we did our job because we had good physical ability, and we had the ability to move and be quick and decisive. And in a hospital, man, it's like you lose all of that. So not only is it, alien, but it's also like you're living in a way that you're not comfortable with at all. So it's weird, so I wanted everybody to love me and think I was great. So I tried to make jokes, and humor's great, it works, but I was using it so much that I wasn't really like thinking about myself. I was trying to make everybody be proud of me. Oh, he's the wounded guy, but I couldn't stop especially at night, man, I could not stop the movie of just fuck ups, everything I'd done wrong, and the dogs getting killed, and how I was at fault for, I felt like I was at fault for that mission failing, the one where Remco was killed and we didn't catch the hostage. I felt I was responsible for Remco's death. I felt I was responsible for all the other dogs' deaths. I felt like, I had not been good to my family all my whole service. I had, you name it. I put the toilet paper roll on wrong once too. I've remembered that, right? Like it was just this raining driving storm of you fuck up. And it was just brutal. And I didn't know how to deal with it. And I didn't talk about it. It would just happen at night when I was, pretty much by myself. And then I started getting in, look, man, when you're in those situations, they're planting some drugs in you. And I was going through a surgery every other day or so. Yeah, I had 18 surgeries on that leg there, So you are not in a position where you can really be reasonable in your thinking. And I think it's important that we have people around us that can help us with that. So, for example, a friend of mine from my former life went to work for a government agency, ended up getting hurt pretty bad, and they medevaced him. And his wife and I were talking. I said, hey, man, when he wakes up, it's important that he has somebody there that he knows. And, my point on this is that we can give each other hints to help, when things are tough for someone else. But I think, if I could give anybody a hint, and God forbid, I don't want anybody to get hurt. I don't want anybody to have to go spend any time in the hospital. But, the reality is it's just a matter of time. When you're in there, you're going to have a hard time. And when you have a friend that's in there, you got to know that it's raining errors, and they're struggling. And so we need to take care of each other there.
Yeah.
And if it's us that we end up in there, I went back to, I just got my knee replaced, and I was freaking out because I didn't want to go back to the hospital. I didn't want to be surgery. I didn't want any of that shit. And I just finally said, you know what? I'm going to be positive. I'm going to try to be as positive as I can to these people who I am afraid of, and man, it just really helped me out that I was just trying to be positive and trying to make it easier on the lady who has to take my blood and easier on that, like the exact opposite of the way you think when you're depressed. Oh, me, I'm so fucked up. I try to go the other way, which is caring about other people and making sure that you're being considerate and blah, blah, blah. I tell you, man, it's almost like a little medicine.
Yeah. And fast forward to where this all kind of culminates and to where you ultimately go get help. You talk about the night that the police were called and how that all kind of took place.
Yeah. So I was basically drinking and eating my pain meds, washing them down with Stolies and, making poor choices. And honestly, I just didn't have hope, and there's no prescription for hope. I talk about it in the book a little bit, but I was told by an old school Vietnam dude, you're either an asset or you're a liability. You're either bringing something to the table or you're making it harder on everybody else who's trying. And I was like, well, I am a fucking liability. And I did not see in myself, this is where my friends came in, right? I just didn't see that I had anything worthwhile to offer. Like I didn't, I was a shooter and I liked it, and I did stuff with dogs and I liked it, but there's, what can I do? I don't have anything that I'm value added at. I don't there's nowhere that I'm wanted where I can go out and do badass missions. And, it was tough. So I decided I didn't want to be around anymore, grabbed my Glock, walked out in the driveway next to the garbage cans because I didn't want to do it in the house and have my wife come to me in the afterlife and kill me again for making a mess in her kitchen. But she saw me out there. She came out and grabbed the gun and took it away. And I know how to use a gun. Like I said, I was just hopeless and crying, and I wanted to die, but I didn't have the sack to do it. So I heard her go in the house, and she called my unit, and they said, hey man, you need to call the police because we're not going to be able to get there fast enough, and you need to tell him who he is. So I heard her on 911. I'm like, all right, cool. So I walked around to the front of the house and sat on the stoop because I knew those guys were coming, and I watched them pull up, and I remember that there had been a shooting that day. So I'm like, yeah, these guys will be fucking fired up. And I watched them get out of the car. I was pretty hazy, pretty messed up, but I do remember a couple of things. The first thing I remember is how professional they were. So they got out of the car. One guy kept his eye on me, and they'd clearly talked about this beforehand, or these guys had been together enough that they just naturally reacted that way. One guy kept his eye on me, and the other guy was looking around the perimeter to make sure. I'm like, that's professional. They didn't get out like, I'm here to fuck you up, So then they came up walking humbly, not cocky. And there's a quote by Toni Morrison, something along the lines of, people won't remember what you did for them, but they'll remember how you made them feel. Mm-hmm. And you guys call it verbal judo, but within a few minutes, man, with those cops, I was talking about baseball. And I distinctly remember thinking, man, these guys must not think I'm a piece of shit, because they're not talking to me like I'm a piece of shit. And I really felt like I was a piece of shit, man. And I wanted them to fucking, kill me. And that was a situation I was not ready for. Like it knocked me off kilter. And I didn't know it blew my mind so much so that I didn't know how to act. Like I didn't, fortunately, my buddies from my team came, the cops said, hey, you guys take him. They took me to the hospital, and then, I started getting treatment. But I want to add one thing in here. When I went to the hospital that night, there was a guy there that met me. He worked for the SOCOM Care Coalition. His name was Mike Day. And he was a SEAL who was shot 27 times and fucking walked out of the place where it happened. Last semester, he smoked himself. And I was in a class and we were reading Moby Dick. And I'm actually going to write a book about this because it was so compelling. Here's this guy, Mike, who was so fucking tough. And I remember the night I went into the emergency room, I saw him there. I was crying. I was in tears. I was embarrassed. Guys from my team were there. Mike was there. I'm like, Mike, man, I got shot once and I'm a fucking mess. You got shot 27 times, dude. And he said, hey, man, we all have our own path through this stuff. Don't worry about shots, and his path, it's ended. When a guy like that, who's been kind of a strength for you, checks out, it can be a challenge. So talking about it, and, that's what we're doing. But after that, I got the help I needed, and I was humbled. And I needed that because I really thought I was the shit. And the more I was exposed to people from the civilian world and the things that they had endured that they did not volunteer for, I became much more pragmatic about my own care, and that I owed it to other people who, from my unit and anywhere else, that is going to be struggling to be there for them. And I think between that and, and doing what I can for the dogs through this organization with these great people, I think, And now look, man, this Yale thing, I'm not kidding about that bridge building stuff. There's a professor I had my first year. He was a philosophy professor. He's taught at Oxford for 30 years. His name is David Charles. He's one of the authorities on Aristotle, actually. He's a brilliant guy. And he's like, hey, man, good leaders, James, good leaders. He called me James. He said, good leaders build bridges. He goes, that's what good leaders are. And he's right. And that's what I want to do. Like even the political stuff. And like I've tried to do that a little bit at Yale. And, you got to be careful. And I get away with a lot because I'm, an old white guy. I got tattoos that are scary and a bullet hole in me here and there. And, so I get away with a little bit. But I really think that's the future, man. I think not only for me personally, but I think that's the only way we're going to make our country better.
Yeah. Well, I want to say, given what you've been through, you've got a lot of courage to talk about it, to come on the Hangar Z podcast and write your book and talk about these things, because every time you talk about it, I'm sure it's like scratching a scab off it. It brings the injury back up and it hurts. But I know the motivation and intent you have behind doing it is to help others that are maybe in the same position as you are, or in a form of that, in a stage of that. So when you look backwards and look at the treatment you received and what's been helpful for you, what can you recommend for folks that might be looking at themselves and saying, hey, I identify with some of what he's saying? What would you recommend for them as far as getting help? And I know help looks different for a lot of people, but what advice would you have for them?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is nobody is as fucked up as they think they are. In fact, if you think you're fucked up, you're already ahead of the game, because most people don't think they're fucked up, right? I would try to go into every single day with the idea that today I have the opportunity to either be somebody who needs help or someone who can help someone else. And maybe both those things will happen in the same day. I would go back to the selfishness of depression and PTSD. Oh, woe is me, woe is me, woe is... And believe me, I wallowed in that shit for 2 years. Oh, nobody loves that, fuck, Even though I went through all these treatments and I was still like, oh, I just don't know, It took me a little bit of time to go, hey, man, get off your ass and get back to work, right? Like, come on. But That's okay. If you're a guy or a lady who's been driving hard in the financial world for 26 years and you boom, the wheels come off the bus, it's okay to wallow a little bit and try to figure things out. I think that's the other part of it, really. The secret, John, for all of this is treat yourself like somebody you love. It's easy to say. But really, you say things to yourself, I'm guaranteeing this. I know I do it. I say things to myself that I would never say to even just a regular person that I didn't know anything about. I really tear myself up, and I really give myself a hard time. And that doesn't help anybody. Now, there's a difference between being humble and being an arrogant asshole. But you don't have to beat yourself. You can say, well, I probably could have done that better, right? There's a way to deal with that. And I'm struggling to do that, even today. I struggle with it. But, treating yourself like somebody you love, that's a hard thing to do. And it's important. And if you love somebody and they were fucked up, you'd say, hey, man, let's go get some help.
Yeah.
If nothing else, find somebody you love and say, man, I'm really fucking hurting.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what to do. And that's okay. Because just give it some time. They'll feel it too. It's just a matter of time, really.
Well, you're doing some. Oh yeah, you're doing some really powerful stuff. On a bunch of different fronts. It's been an honor to sit here and talk to you and walk through the story with you. Reading it and talking to you about it are two different things. And I recommend anybody who's listened to the podcast to go back and read Touching the Dragon. I feel like this is a book that anybody in public service and public safety needs to read, and it's very enlightening. It should be required reading material in the academy, as far as I'm concerned.
It should.
I got 2 boxes of books I got to sign that a guy bought for a VA center, which is great. It makes me happy, man. You know what? That book was hard to write, and my co-author, he did a really good job. That was hard.
It's a great book.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Thanks, fellas.
Yeah, but thank you again for what you're doing for the community. For the dogs, and for just everything. It's absolutely amazing to walk this story with you.
Thanks,
and,
man.
Yeah.
Anybody out there wants to support us, we need your help, man. SpikesCanineFund.org. Yeah. We got about 40 some odd dogs on our list right now that need either a bulletproof vest or a heat alarm for the car. So, we need some help. And look, we've had success in the past because people give a shit about their community and about the dogs and about the law enforcement folks who are out there trying to make sure that, they're standing in the breach for us. So thanks, fellas.
If I could just say one thing to you real quick, Jimmy, is when I read your book, I finished it at like 2 a.m. And I remember sitting down and typing an email to you immediately and saying something to the effect, thanking you for one thing, but you said, I remember you having ads for the book saying, you'll laugh, you'll cry. You can remember that with the dog talking. And I said, I laughed, I cried, and I thanked you because shooters and door kickers in the big scheme of things are kind of a dime a dozen. They're not really. That's not insulting anybody that does that. What I'm saying is what impressed me about you was your second war, that you were willing to lay it all out right there in your second war courageously. Most people wouldn't do that. Yet the courage that you showed to do that was greater than any courage of fast roping in and hitting a target, in my humble opinion. I just think that takes great courage. And you're saving lives. There's no doubt about it. You are not a liability. You are an asset. You're still an asset. It's just a different asset. And you're doing great things for dogs and great things for first responders and fellow military. And I'm just really glad that Haggerty introduced us years ago. I feel very fortunate to have this connection with you. And thank you for taking the offer to come and talk. This was really powerful and incredible. Thank you, Jimmy.
Well, thanks, Jack. I appreciate it. I appreciate your friendship. I'm grateful for your long list of service and accomplishments.
Well, thank you.
We live in a good nation because of people like you, so I appreciate it. John, thanks, man.
Thanks, Jimmy.
I look forward to seeing what you put together, and I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jimmy. I know you got to run, so we'll let you go, but
all right, man.
We'll catch you soon.